Welcome to this course on lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations, LOLER. The Lifting Operations and Lifting Equipment Regulations, LOLER. LOLER aims to reduce the risks to people's health and safety from the use of lifting equipment provided at work. In general terms, LOLER requires that lifting equipment provided for use at work is strong and stable enough for its particular use and marked to indicate safe working loads, SWL, positioned and installed to minimize any risks, used safely, in other words, the work is planned, organized and performed by competent people, and subject to ongoing thorough examination and, where appropriate, inspection by competent people. Lifting equipment includes any equipment used at work for lifting or lowering loads, including attachments used for anchoring, fixing or supporting the load. LOLER covers a wide range of equipment including cranes, lifts, hoists, forklift trucks, and mobile elevating work platforms, slings, hooks, shackles, eye bolts, and ropes used for work positioning. Injuries and dangerous occurrences arising from lifting operations account for a significant proportion of the total of those occurring offshore. Falling loads, unstable swinging or drifting loads causing collision with other structures and personnel, crushing, pinning or entrapment of personnel by loads, and lifting equipment tilting or overturning. The risk of injuries can be reduced by positioning or installing lifting equipment to minimize the need to lift loads over people, creating an exclusion zone around a load that is being moved along a fixed path, and positioning equipment in certain locations in order to prevent trapping points. LOLER states that every employer shall ensure that every lifting operation is properly planned by a competent person, appropriately supervised, and carried out in a safe manner. The person planning the operation should have adequate practical and theoretical knowledge and experience of planning lifting operations. All lifting operations must be risk assessed. When planning a lift, all risks identified by the risk assessment must be addressed, and the resources, procedures and responsibilities required must be identified to ensure that the lifting operation is carried out safely. When planning a lift, the following factors should be considered to ensure that the task is carried out safely: weight, shape and center of gravity of the load, availability of lifting points, how often the equipment will be used to carry out the task, environmental conditions, starting and finishing positions, available personnel and their knowledge, training and experience. The person responsible for the lift plan should have appropriate knowledge and experience of planning lifts. For routine lifting operations, a lift plan may only be required to be written once, but it will need to be reviewed prior to each lift to ensure that nothing has changed. For complex, non-routine lifting operations, a separate lift plan will be needed each time the task is carried out, as non-routine lifts vary on each occasion and will require a specific risk assessment each time the lift is carried out. The lift plan should identify the competent person who is responsible for planning the lift, identify the lifting operation to which it relates, outline the step-by-step instructions for carrying out the lift, identify the lifting equipment required, and outline the activities assigned to each person. With any lifting operation, it is important to ensure that the lifting operation is planned carefully through the development of a lift plan. A suitable and adequate risk assessment is undertaken. The roles of individuals involved in the lifting operation are clarified. The correct equipment is used and maintained regularly. Personnel involved in the lift are competent. All procedures and precautions are adhered to, and personnel are aware that they must stop the job if they are in any doubt about safety. Although LOLER covers the lifting of persons or man riding, it is important to note that the raising and lowering of people by work equipment which is not specifically designed for the purposes should only be undertaken in exceptional circumstances, when it is not practicable to gain access by less hazardous means. Where it is necessary to use such work equipment to lift people, care must be taken to ensure that all precautions are taken to ensure safety, including appropriate supervision. Every operation must be subject to a risk assessment, and only personnel that are trained and competent should undertake man-riding operations. Examples of measures to be taken when lifting personnel: implementing edge protection and tow boards on working platforms, establishing suitable means of communication between the operator of the equipment and the person being lifted, undertaking daily inspections of equipment by competent personnel, marking equipment to indicate that it is for lifting personnel and the number of personnel it can lift safely, ensuring that ropes, chains and safety gear are present in the event of failure of the primary means of support, providing adequate instruction and training for all persons involved in the lifting operation. All work equipment should be marked in a clearly visible manner with any markings appropriate for reasons of health and safety. All pieces of machinery for lifting loads are clearly marked to indicate their safe working loads, SWL. Accessories for lifting are also marked in such a way that it is possible to identify the characteristics necessary for their safe use, and lifting equipment which is designed for lifting persons is appropriately and clearly marked to this effect. It should be noted that the SWL of equipment can vary depending upon how it is configured. Where this is the case, the lifting machinery must be clearly marked with information about how the configuration affects the SWL. This can take the form of an indicator, plate, chart or certificate. The number of personnel involved in any lifting operation depends on the complexity of the lift. However, the following personnel will usually be involved: competent person, banksman or signaller, operator, and load handler. The competent person is the individual who is responsible for the planning of the lift operation. The banksman or signaller is responsible for giving clear instructions to the operator of the lifting equipment. They need to have a clear view of the path of the load and should always be in view or able to communicate effectively with the operator of the lifting equipment. The operator of the lifting equipment, for example, the crane operator, must keep in constant contact with the banksman by using hand signals, radios or telephones. The load handler is the person with the responsibility for attaching, detaching and securing the loads to the lifting equipment. All employers must ensure that all lifting equipment is thoroughly examined, after installation and before being put into service for the first time, and after assembly and before being put into service at a new site or in a new location. Where equipment is exposed to conditions that can cause deterioration, it shall be subject to thorough examination, at least every 12 months, at least every 6 months in the case of lifting equipment for lifting persons, and each time that exceptional circumstances occur which may jeopardize the safety of the equipment. Equipment should also be thoroughly inspected by a competent person at suitable intervals. If the competent person finds a defect with the lifting equipment during the thorough examination, they must inform the employer immediately and confirm this in their report. The employer must take action to rectify any defect they are informed of. If they do not, they will be breaking the law. For defects that need to be rectified within a certain timescale, they must repair or replace the defective equipment within the specified time and not use it after that time unless the defect has been satisfactorily remedied.